to the Eastwood Tulsa Podcast. My name is Jeremy Rhodes. Welcome, Pastor. It's good to see you.
Thank you.
This
Welcome
is Gordon
to you guys.
Small, and we're just going to hang out here today. We've been having fun talking about giving over the last couple of things. This whole beginning of the year has been a lot of fun. So
and texting.
Texting, that's right. So
by the way, you I'm not sending you or returning your text as quickly.
As quickly now?
Yeah, and I don't feel bad about it at all.
You don't, that's good. I'm glad you don't feel bad about it. That's great. You know, we had that discussion a couple of weeks ago about, texting, and I thought it was funny that right when we were having that discussion, you got a text, but you did not immediately stop the conversation to answer it.
No, I didn't. That's what a text message is for.
Is not to stop. That way you don't have to interrupt somebody.
Right there.
So have you changed your position on text messages?
I'm leaning toward the more liberal position.
The more liberal position. My side being the liberal.
Your side.
Okay, well that's good. I'm glad to hear that.
And I got a couple of those mammoth, those.
Oh yeah, you got chapters and books and stuff.
Table of contents and things like that. They kind of make me mad.
You don't like that?
No, call me, please. Call me.
If you've got that much to say, go ahead and give me a call.
Right.
And interrupt everything that you're doing right there, so you make sure
and
that this is important to me.
Yeah.
You need to hear it right now.
This is really not that important.
This is not important?
Yeah.
Well, you can learn a lot here, so we're really glad you've joined us today. This has been a lot of fun in
giving.
That's what we're doing. We're doing giving. This particular month of February, we are doing Share the Love here at Eastwood. And it's a lot of fun, actually. When you think about it, when we talk about Share the Love, there's all kinds of things. I feel like all of a sudden we're back in the 60s or something with some type of flower power type of motif. But really, sharing the love is just sharing the love of Jesus. I mean, we think about that. It's kind of a hokey way to say it. It's kind of corny. But when I do think about that, sharing the love, I do need to share. I need to share the love of Christ in my actions and what I do, people that I see every day. But it's so important that we are living our faith out loud, where other people can actually see it and hear it.
Right, and love is a form of giving, for God so loved the world that he gave. So I don't think you can separate them, can you?
No, I don't think so at all.
No.
Love is such a huge aspect of especially of the Christian life, because God is love. So everything that's going to be wrapped up in our Christian walk it's going to evolve at some point around love.
Yeah, and it looks like when I look at social media, sometimes there's a child, whether it's a handicapped child or somebody's gone through a traumatic event, and people respond in love. They also respond in giving. They give and they help. It's real easy for the world to see that, even if they're not followers of Jesus.
Yeah. I think all of our hearts are pulled in those types of situations to just step in and help, because whether you've been in that situation or you just feel the empathy towards someone, compassion, you want to help in some way.
And Jesus did that. He saw the multitudes. He was moved with compassion, and then he healed them, or he provided, like with the feeding of the
5,000,
the multitude.
Yeah,
so
3,000.
If we're moved with compassion, but we don't do anything, or our heart is moved, then we're shutting off God's flow.
We're not really even. We're not even in that, which kind of leads us to what we're talking about today. We've been talking about the different types of givers, and the question we've been asking is, what kind of giver are you? And so it's been interesting. Last week we talked about 3 different kinds, and really boiled down to willingness, which was the hard issue, like we just talked about.
Yeah, and I've been kind of questioning or checking my own spiritual temperature to see if I'm giving too many types, and it's getting confusing. But the more I look at it, the more I think we need to look at these types of givers. And we looked at 4 in alphabetical order because there's so many. So I'm kind of saying that out loud because I'm thinking it. Bountiful givers, contented givers, generous givers, and joyful givers.
Right.
And they're all similar, and we looked at, I like 2 Corinthians 8 and 9. Looking at chapter 9, it talks about, bountiful givers.
Bountiful givers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And generous givers, and sometimes those words are translated differently in different versions of the Bible, but we all know generous doesn't necessarily mean you give a lot. It's the attitude with which you give and the willingness. 2 Corinthians 9, they were ready to give. Yeah, and I think it sneaks up on Christians. They're not prepared to give.
Sometimes.
Yeah, sometimes. And then we say, okay, we have a lot of ways that you can give in our church, you know, with your phone, or you can give, you know, whatever, however you want to give. But we need to be ready.
Right.
Not only to share the gospel, but to give.
Yeah. I knew of a couple, they live up in Michigan. I won't tell their names, just not for any reason, just that's not important. The biggest aspect of their story is he was in the ice cream industry. And so he was coming up with flavors.
Thank you for waiting until after the Daniel fast to bring that up.
Well, ice cream is one of my favorite things.
I had a bowl last night.
Did you really?
Yeah, I really did.
I abstained after the Super Bowl and this, and I needed it after all that chili we ate last night. But he did, he was coming up with flavors, and that's what he was. He was salesman, different stuff. But he had it in his heart that he was an entrepreneur with a gift of giving. So he was trying to find more ways on how to give, not find
how not to give.
More ways how not to give. And so God used that with some very interesting circumstances in his life, but then they came up with some flavors that were just his, and he started his own flavor company from that. Well, now you can go buy their flavors in every single grocery store in America. They are in different, from different things like Highland is a brand. So they contract with these brands that do ice cream. And then if you've ever had Moose Tracks, this is their thing, Denali flavors.
I've heard of that.
Is one of my favorite ice creams.
Move me too much.
Move you. That is one of my favorite ice creams. But here is a couple, I know them personally. Their whole motivation was to give, to help finance the kingdom of God, to give out of the willingness. But their whole thing, the way they made decisions, the way they've set themselves up, was to put themselves into a position where they could give. And that is for them, they're a bountiful giver.
Yes.
I don't know all that they do, but I know they help support many organizations. Right. And it kind of brings us back to really Scripture where obviously God is the greatest gift giver.
Right.
And there's a Scripture in James chapter 1, verses 12 through 8 that really kind of sets the foundation for these types of givers. So let's read that for a second. It says, "Blessed is the man who endures temptation, for when he has been approved, he will receive the crown of life, which the Lord has promised to give those who love him. Let no one say when he is tempted, I'm tempted by God, for God cannot be tempted by evil, nor does he tempt anyone." There's a really big theological statement right there. "But each one is tempted when he is drawn away by his own desires and enticed. Then, when desire has conceived, it gives birth to sin, and sin, when it's fully grown, brings death. So don't be deceived, my beloved brethren. Every good gift and every perfect gift is from above and comes down from the Father of lights, in whom there is no variation or shadow of turning. Of his own will he brought us forth by the word of truth, that we might be kind of first fruits of his creation."
Yes. I love that passage because it shows that God is the one, even initially in the garden, that gave them everything except one tree. Mm-hmm. He wasn't withholding any good from them, and they wanted the one tree, which is what we do. So whenever you have that temptation, that pull, what that pull is saying, get something other than through God's generous giving to us. Right. And I think it's so revealing about why we're tempted. If we're not content, if we don't believe that he's a giver, then we're going to try to get it on our own, by our own method. Yeah. Our means,
by that, whatever we do, however we're going to do that. But every good gift, every perfect gift comes from above.
Yeah.
You know, I've heard it said many times that what's good is good, what is good, and what is bad is bad. And it really kind of delineates this. If God is not the one who is tempting us with evil or tempting us with bad, then there is no bad in him.
No.
There's no bad that he can kind of get our direction.
No.
It's only the things that are good that he does for us. Even sometimes that we may not see it as good, but it's still good.
Right, and we could go into, all things work together for good.
Right.
I read recently that Joseph said to his brothers, he said, God sent me. God was the one that caused me to be sold into
Right.
Egypt. I mean, that took, chapter 37 of Genesis through 50, so Joseph is a
long
huge
time.
example in the Bible. And he said God was the one, but that's another discussion about giving.
That is, but it really does. So it points to the same issue, which is the issue of the heart.
Yeah.
Points to that same issue. So a statement that you.
By the way, you're getting a text message on your phone. Do you want to respond to it?
No, this is not a convenient time for me.
Okay.
So you said last week that obviously the one way that to understand giving, we've got to know the giver.
Got to.
We've got to know the giver in that. And so there are these other types of things that we want to talk about today. Bountiful giver, consistent giver.
Contented.
Contented as well. Then generous.
And joyful.
And joyful. So tell me about bountiful.
Bountiful.
What does the Bible say about bountiful givers?
Well, in the context, it's talking about if you sow a lot, you reap a lot. If you sow little, you reap little. So once you purpose in your heart how you're going to give, then God returns that. So we could call that the law of sowing and reaping.
Right.
So bountiful just means you're not holding back. And why would a farmer do that? If he has land to sow and he has acres to plant, why would he just sow a little bit of seed and have a little bit of return?
Yeah, it doesn't make any sense.
It doesn't make any sense. So we need to be like God is. God is a bountiful giver. He's not withholding from us.
Sure.
We need to follow him.
In this particular aspect, though, is it, because I think that's what gets confusing for folks. Every time we start talking about giving, our first thing that we think about is money.
More.
Or it's only about money. And in these contexts of Scripture, it's not always about money.
No, whatever a man sows, that he will also reap. So if you have a steady diet of world or media or whatever it is that's not helpful, then you're going to reap that kind of a crop.
Right.
You sow a little, Jesus said, a little leaven leavens the whole lump. You can't get away from Genesis and the laws of sowing and reaping, the seed in the fruit producing of its own kind. I think that's bigger than our discussion here.
Right.
But it all is a reflection of God's giving through his creation. So bountiful, I think we need to be.
Bountiful. And so that would be...
As Yoda says to the command center, take me, not take me. That's dumb. Why are we talking about that? Go ahead.
Well, Yoda, there's a lot of quotes there.
Yeah.
The bountiful side is...
and now you're not able to think, are you?
No, I'm thinking about not just money, but if I can give bountifully, because if I don't have financial means, but I have time, or if I have a gift that I can give of a special gift, a talent, or something of that nature. This is really the essence of what he's talking about. It's not just what's in my bank account.
No,
what expendable cash I have.
If you sow harsh words or you sow criticism, then you reap that. Sometimes we forget that the result of that is what we've sown, or God's just trying to chip away or grow us. Yeah. So you're right. It doesn't have to be just money.
No.
It's
a lot more than that. There's an aspect here from Proverbs 11:25 that says, "The generous soul will be made rich, and he who waters will also be watered himself."
Yeah, I love the Proverbs. I read them every day, and that one just leaps out at this idea. And there's some reciprocal understanding here, which is obviously that's what God does to show us our heart.
Right.
If you're withholding, then when you need, it's not going to be there.
Yeah.
So the measure you use for others, which we're going to talk about specifically coming up, in
Yeah.
one of these podcasts is the one that God will use for you. I think He wants us to see what our heart is. I read this
Right. morning
morning in the Psalms, with the merciful man, you show yourself merciful. So if you give mercy, you receive mercy. With the deceptive man, God shows Himself to be shrewd.
Right.
And we think that it's God that's the problem. No, God's not the problem. We're the problem. Like
Every
G.K.
time.
Chesterton said, what's the problem with the world? Me.
Yeah.
That was his article in the newspaper. I need to look at me. God is continually working on me.
Right.
So, and giving shows our spiritual maturity.
For 2 Corinthians, you mentioned it earlier, 2 Corinthians 8, chapter 8 and chapter 9, was this whole issue that was happening with kind of the famine and different things. And so Paul was taking up an offering to try to help them. And it says here in chapter 8, it says, "Moreover, brethren, we made known to you the grace of God bestowed on the churches of Macedonia, that in a great trial of affliction, the abundance of their joy and the deep poverty abounded in the riches of their liberality."
Yeah, and liberality is that word generosity in some. Yeah, that equation doesn't compute, because if you're having affliction, if you have deep poverty, your joy level usually is low. It just doesn't mean that you give generously or liberally. So most of the time, people that are going through difficulty, if they really are givers and God is living in them, they give even if they're not able to really do that, or logically able to do that.
Yeah. We talked about this the other day when you and I were talking. We were talking about this concept that we saw this with I believe it's Elisha and the widow woman who's got the son. She's got just enough oil, to make one more cake. And her statement was, "I'm going to make one more cake for me and my son, and then we're going to die."
Yeah, this is it.
This
We're
was
done.
it. And so obviously that would be a great trial of affliction in deep poverty. And Elijah steps in and goes, "Why don't you make that cake for me and for you and your son?" And so she did. She had enough to make for Elijah and for herself. And then from that point on, there's like this amazing, almost supernatural provision that begins to start kicking in.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, she began to have abundance in what she needed just for her daily needs, but then it became even greater than that.
Right, and eventually we'll do a podcast on sacrificial giving or unconditional giving. And we may look at that lady as well as the woman that gave, the mite.
Right.
So there is a faith element there too. There's a faith element which keeps coming to my mind. We give by faith, we walk by faith, we serve by faith. All of it is a faith step.
I look at that story and what he sent, what Paul was presenting here, is that many times that God will bring a need to us to see if we will meet that need. And in return, after He sees the willingness of our heart, obviously then His abundance begins to flow towards us. It's not so much, it kind of is that test. Where is your heart? And if He presents a need to you, will you meet that need? Will you have generosity? Will you give in a bountiful way? Will you be contented in that sense? And then God also meets your need.
Right, and you mentioned to me last week that godliness with contentment is great gain.
Such a huge
And so
thing.
I mention that often, that we need to be contented not with what we give, but what we already have. And if we already are contented with what we have, there won't be a problem of giving.
No.
If we're discontented, no matter how much more we have, it won't increase our giving. That's my personal belief, but I think the Bible bears that out.
Yeah.
Discontent does not produce great giving.
No.
Because we look at God as not bountifully giving from above.
Right.
We look at God as withholding. You can't have that tree.
Right.
Yeah, and that's the tree that we want, or that's what we want.
We kind of came up with this equation, which is really good as we end here today. God's grace, this was out of
Got to have that. That's the
Corinthians.
equation.
Yeah, God's grace plus great affliction, plus abundance of joy, plus deep poverty equals rich generosity.
Yeah, that blows my mind every time I think about that equation. And I think that we need to recognize that, because the people that have the most don't necessarily give the most.
Right.
It's the people that already have an attitude of, I'm going to bless God because He's blessed me.
Right.
That give, and it doesn't matter whether they're in straits or not.
Yeah.
That it doesn't matter.
Oh, man. Barna summed it up this way out of a research he did in 2017, just that there are two types of givers, Christian givers. There are givers and there are keepers,
right,
is the way he qualified it. Givers want to provide for their family, give charitably, serve God with their money, and leave a legacy, he wrote. Keepers, on the other hand, want to support their choice of lifestyle, be content, show that they are hard workers, and be debt-free.
Yeah.
That's two amazing qualities. Maybe in our next podcast we can break that down just a little bit more, because there's a lot of things there. He made one more statement I'll mention. Christians with giving goals give a lot, and Christians with keeping goals, meaning they
give little or nothing
give
at all.
less or nothing at all. Yeah.
And that's where we are. We have a group of people that do not give for whatever reason without making a judgment call.
Right.
But in his stats, it shows up.
That.
Yeah, it shows up.
So there's going to be a lot then we get to talk about in this next section, because it'll be, there's also when you purpose in your heart what you should give, and that's along this line of, if I set giving goals, it's purposing in my heart. I need to be led of the Lord as well as there. So there was 5 things. We'll jump back into this next week, but we need to give expression to what God is impressing us to do.
Yeah, if you give expression to impression, you won't go through depression. If you don't give expression to impressions, I learned that from someone else a long time ago, then you'll keep it in and you'll end up being depressed. And we're talking about God impressing us, the Spirit of God moving us. And we have to give expression to impression.
So we're going to pick it up right there in the next podcast next week as we do that. And you're about to head to Mexico for a couple of days.
Looking forward to that. We're going to leave a week from today, the Lord willing, and we're going to go to central Mexico, to the state of Michoacan, to the capital city of Morelia, and work in that area.
That'll be awesome.
Yeah.
I've been there with you before. It's a
we had a blast.
Great place. Amazing what God is doing there. We're going to have to share some of those testimonies. So really, as we end here today, the question comes back to all of us too, is just, where's our motivation for giving? What kind of giver are we? Are we that we really are a giver, or are we a keeper? Do you have giving goals? Do you have things that you've already set out, purposed in your heart as to where I want to go, what I feel like the Spirit of God is impressing me to do? Those are some of the key things to take away from today's discussion as you continue to ask yourself, am I bountifully giving? Am I content in that giving? What about generosity? So as we continue to unpack some of these things over the next couple of podcasts, I think this is going to become easier for all of us to understand. But I pray that it will also bless you and really in your Christian walk position you to where you are in the place where you are following the Spirit of God, that you truly are sowing exactly what He's asking you to do. And from that, the reaping will come as blessing in your life. So thanks for joining us today on this episode. It's been a lot of fun. You've got a few text messages now you're going to get to respond to.
Yep. What kind of a texter are you?
Yeah. Goodness gracious. I'm not a Yoda texter, so thanks. I hope you get to join us next week in our next podcast. So thanks, Pastor.
Yeah,
Appreciate it. See you next week as we take the truths of Sunday into every day of the week. God bless you.